Without further ado, I'll move to our first question. It's going to be Kevin Brennan. Kevin Brennan.
Thank you very much, Chair. And I have received hospitality from the BBC in the past as a declaration of interest. Croeso, welcome everybody. Bore da, good morning. Can I start with you, please, Mr. Higginson? And thank you very much for engaging with our inquiry. But I wonder why Reach has decided not to engage with the public interest journalism working party that's been established by the Welsh Government for the industry.
I don't know is the short answer to that, but I will find out.
It would be useful because you may not be aware, but members of the NUJ have written to members of Parliament from Wales and also to members of the Senedd about their concerns in relation to local journalism and Reach's management of titles within Wales, and that's one of the points that they've made in their letter to MPs and members of the Senedd. So it would be very useful if you were able to find out and possibly write to the committee in relation to that matter.
Yeah, absolutely. I've seen the letter that came out last week, yes.
So it was actually the penultimate paragraph in the letter. Did you not think to check why that wasn't the case before you appeared before the Select Committee this morning?
That particular point I didn't pick up on in the document. There were issues further up in there which we were working on preparing a response to in the multitude of points put across in that letter which we've been working through, but that one hadn't resonated, but I will get the answer to you. Okay, well, I'd be
very grateful if you could. On the other points, you know, within the letter, you say that you've had a look at. There are a number of issues that are raised by the journalists in relation to Reach's management of titles within Wales, including issues like a reduction in space for Welsh news, the cuts in pagination being to core news items rather than being related to generic gardening features and so on, and redundancy for story editors, cover price increases, providing less value for money, stories of a more trivial nature, stories of no direct relevance to Wales appearing on the websites with increasing frequency because of the tendency to attract more page views. A general threat, if you like, to the Welsh news coverage and to Welsh democracy is the way they put it, I think, in the letter. And they go on to say they don't have any real quarrel with local management, but it's with that the way that the group overall are managing these titles and the impact that's having on public interest journalism. What's your reaction to the points that they've made?
So, if I can split it into the print side and the online side in terms of the answer, pagination and cover price are directly correlated to the rocketing cost of newsprint that publishers large and small have been dealing with. Don't recognise the overall assertion that we're walking away from public interest news or news that's particularly relevant to Wales in favour of more generic features, and indeed the trivialisation of news, which is a point that we have heard in the past. Don't recognise either. The Wales Online team regularly win awards for their public interest journalism. By some distance, they continue to produce the best read newspapers in Wales. By some distance, the best read website in Wales, and that's a website which sets out to ensure that power is held to account, conducting public interest journalism day in, day out, but also trying to have a meaningful impact on people's lives day in, day out. And what sometimes gets passed off as trivial in the sort of correspondence you're talking about is actually quite important to a lot of our readers. We have invested in the Media Wales newsroom as we've come out of the pandemic with additional hires. We've expanded with new brands within Wales Online. So I think this idea that we're somehow inching away from our responsibility to public interest news is wrong, and inching away from our commitment to providing local Welsh content is also wrong.
Can I just go on to some more general questions for the panel? I wonder what Professor Fenton, what you think, whether local newspapers benefit from being bought out by multi-title publishers, Is it possible for local independent news organisations to survive in this market?
I think it's really tough for local independent news organisations to survive, actually. They are, a lot of that content gets to readers via social media, we know that. So there was a recent report out just a couple of days ago by the Charitable Journalism Project, which did an in-depth look at local news provision in 7 areas around the UK. And they found, actually, just reading directly from them, that by the readers themselves, local government is considered to be poorly scrutinised by journalists. So this is in the news that exists, not the independent media. This is in the newspapers owned largely by mega corporations. National institutions and local public services, including the NHS, police, education and the environment, are thought to be underreported and misrepresented. Local news providers are seen as repeating institutional lines by publishing press releases uncritically instead of reporting independently. There's a significant lack of knowledge by people themselves in relation to local politics and current affairs. In 2 communities, there was virtually no awareness of imminent local government reorganisation. And that unfamiliarity, they concluded, was actually driving a sense of distrust in government itself.
And is there any evidence that independent news titles, where they survive, do a better job than those that are subject to
there is evidence
bias?
for that, actually, where because they have a different engagement with their local community often, and they're seeking to do a kind of a community service rather than just to make profit. So you've got something like the Bristol Cable, for example, which is very embedded in its community, has large-scale community meetings regularly with its subscribers. It's a subscriber-led newspaper, and they decide its editorial direction, they decide its ethical advertising policy, they decide, so there's a much more of an investment into the local community. They're also training up journalists from disenfranchised communities. They're providing a different sort of service because they're invested in public interest journalism rather than just increasing shareholder return.
Okay, and we've taken evidence from that organisation already as part of the inquiry. Mr Hutchinson, is there anything you want to comment on that section?
I absolutely agree that independents do offer a different value to the communities than multi-title publishers, purely because we do know our area a lot better. A lot of titles owned by the larger publishers are usually based out of the patch that they serve. They're edited outside of the patch they serve, and they don't necessarily have the local knowledge. They don't drink in the same pub as their readers, their children don't go to the same school as their readers, they don't live in the same community as their readers. We understand our patch a lot better. It's an indictment of the way that the local media business model, if you like, has been run over the past 10 years, where big offices where journalists are based out of the patch have been created to reduce overheads. We struggle, absolutely, with making sure we can pay the bills, keep the lights on, but we provide local news above and beyond what our local competitors do, not just in the amount of stories, but also in the type of stories. You know, we are part of the LDRS system, so we make sure that, you know, local council meetings are covered.
Can you just, for the record, what's LDRS stand
So
for?
the Local Democracy Reporting System, set up by the BBC, set up and funded through the BBC, allows for a reporter to provide meeting notes, meeting articles from local councils and police and such forth, which we can then put on our website and give to our communities. Even though some of the other local competitors also are part of that scheme, they don't always use all the information from there. So we are a database, if you like, of what's happening in our local area on an ongoing basis.
Okay. The large multi-title groups, Ms Egerton, are enjoying pretty high profits at the moment, and paying pretty high salaries to executives. I'm sure you noted in the letter as well from the National Union of Journalists that they make reference to Reach's Chief Executive Officer, Jim Mullen, who's, according to these journalists who've written to me, so I'm hoping that's reliable information, was in receipt of a remuneration package worth more than £4 million in 2021. How is the industry able, how are you able to do that sort of thing in an industry that's supposed to be struggling for sustainability?
Well, in terms of the remuneration that you talk about, our CEO's pay and other elements of remuneration was agreed with the board and is not excessive for organisations within the private sector of a similar size to ours. I think the challenges facing our industry are much more about making sure that the revenue that's generated from our content goes back to content creators, big and small, rather than sitting, as it does at the moment, largely with the people who are distributing the content and not really adding much to the process. But
your profits went up 9.2% in 2021 to £146.1 million, and yet we're hearing, in the letter from the NUJ and elsewhere that, there's a constant need to cut back on the numbers of journalists being employed, etc. Are these sorts of profits sustainable, and are journalistic compromises being made to achieve these profits?
So in answer to your second question, no, I don't think journalistic compromises are being made. We have more journalists now than we did at the start of the pandemic in Reach. We did have a good year last year. The profits are sustainable if we have a system in place which properly rewards the effort put into content, the 1,500 local news journalists that Reach employs, and we get a fair reward for the content that we're creating. The challenges of the industry are well documented over a decade. I believe the safest place for local journalism to flourish is with a successful commercial model behind it, and that's what we're striving to build at the moment.
Professor Fenton?
I would challenge that strongly, in the sense that these are models about getting short-term profitability that happened a long time ago. So this was began in the 1990s, consolidation. This is not something that happened just when the advertising model collapsed for newspapers. So it's been a long-term commercial model. Yes, it's the one that gives most profitability. It's not the one that gives most local benefit and serves democracy best. When you've got, and David will correct me if I'm wrong here, but when you've got 15 large offices serving 110 titles, they are, what you get there is a lot of recirculated press releases. You get a lot of kind of cut and paste journalism. You get journalists which are not embedded in the local communities, as Paul was saying. These are, it's becoming a very different type of journalism. Back in 2010, I led a research project that was called Meeting the News Needs of Local Communities. And then we were talking to people, and this is particularly people I think of who may be disenfranchised, maybe older parts of the population, who are not used to scrolling through social media to get their news content. They've really suffered a democratic impact, a negative democratic impact in everything moving online. That's, the consequences for consolidation has meant none of that news is actually relevant to them anymore. Okay. And it's just, I really think the model is for profit. It's not for increasing the democratic health of a local community.
Okay, thanks. I'll leave it there, Chair.